Imagine an ancient empire that didn't conquer with swords, but with sails. A civilization that didn't build grand monuments, but quietly connected the ancient world with trade, innovation, and language. Now imagine that you've probably never heard their whole story. They're called the Phoenicians. These master seafarers helped stitch the ancient Mediterranean together. They spread the alphabet. They traded purple dye so valuable it was once worth its weight in silver. They founded cities, including one that would become legend, Carthage. The Phoenicians were the quiet engine of ancient civilization, and their fingerprints are still on our maps, our words, and even our money. Today, we uncover the lost story of the Phoenicians, the forgotten empire that built the world, one ship, one scroll, and one deal at a time. Sailors of civilization. Who were the Phoenicians? They weren't an empire in the way we usually think about empires. No single king ruled over them. No massive armies thundered across continents, waving a single flag. The Phoenicians were something different, something more subtle, and in many ways, more impressive. Originating in the narrow coastal region that is now Lebanon and parts of Syria and northern Israel, the Phoenicians emerged around 1500 BCE. They lived between the towering mountains and the Mediterranean Sea, with hardly enough land to support a traditional empire. But what they lacked in farmland, they more than made up for in cunning, courage, and craftsmanship. The sea was their salvation. By 1200 BCE, when many major civilizations were crumbling due to the mysterious Bronze Age collapse, the Phoenicians were thriving. They didn't just survive, they expanded. How? By becoming the greatest sailors and traders of their age. They were city-states, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and later Carthage. Each was independent, but they shared a common language, religious practices, and, most importantly, a passion for the sea. They built fast, maneuverable ships with advanced rigging and deep hulls capable of withstanding the Mediterranean's fury. They ventured farther than anyone else dared. Their navigational knowledge was so legendary that the Greeks credited them with inventing the art of navigation itself. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote that Phoenician sailors had possibly circumnavigated Africa under the patronage of Egyptian pharaoh Necho II in the 6th century BCE, nearly 2,000 years before Europeans would try. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Phoenicians wasn't their ships, it was their script. They created the world's first phonetic alphabet. Unlike the complex cuneiform of Mesopotamia or Egyptian hieroglyphics, their system used symbols to represent sounds. This innovation made reading and writing accessible, not just to scribes, but to merchants and common folk. The Greeks adopted it, added vowels, and passed it to the Romans. That's right, the alphabet you're hearing right now has its roots in Phoenician ink. According to the British Museum, the Phoenician alphabet was in widespread use by 1050 BCE and directly influenced Greek and Latin scripts, making it arguably one of the most important inventions in human communication. But their story was more than just trade routes and alphabets. It was the story of a people who knew how to work with others, who didn't conquer lands but connected them. In a world filled with warlords and empires of fire, the Phoenicians were an empire by network, by influence, and by intelligence. And that made them essential, even if history tried to erase them. The Purple Empire: trade, wealth, and the invention of value. They didn't have gold mines. They didn't hoard spices. What they had was snails. Specifically, the murex snail, found along their rocky coastline. From this humble creature, the Phoenicians extracted a rare purple dye. It took thousands of snails and days of fermentation to produce even a small amount. But the result? A brilliant deep purple that didn't fade in the sun. In an age where color was status, this purple became the shade of kings and emperors. The word Phoenician even comes from the Greek phoenix, meaning purple. It was called Tyrian purple, after the city of Tyre, and it made the Phoenicians fabulously wealthy. But they didn't stop at dye. They built an empire of commerce. Cedar wood from Lebanon, glass from Sidon, papyrus from Byblos, wine, olive oil, jewelry, pottery, they traded it all. Their ships could be found from Egypt to Cyprus and from Greece to Iberia. They were the first to create what some historians now call a pre-modern global economy. They didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas. Through their voyages, the Phoenicians helped spread metallurgy, agricultural techniques, and artistic styles. Archaeological finds in Sardinia and even Spain show clear Phoenician influence, including shared religious symbols and burial customs. And perhaps the most underappreciated part of their economic brilliance? Standardization. They helped pioneer systems of weights and measures that facilitated long-distance commerce. They minted some of the earliest coins in the Mediterranean, introducing a consistent medium of exchange to trading cultures that previously relied on barter. Their genius lay in seeing value where others saw chaos. They looked at a rock and saw iron, looked at a swamp and saw salt, and looked at a sea and saw a highway. Their legacy is buried not under grand pyramids, but in shards of amphorae scattered across ancient harbors. Phoenician pottery has been found in Morocco, Italy, Tunisia, and even as far as Britain. They were not the richest empire, nor the largest, but they may have been the most influential. They showed that wealth could be built not on conquest, but on connection. Carthage, the daughter that almost devoured Rome. If the Phoenicians had one crown jewel, one city that truly stood out to the great powers of the ancient world, it was Carthage. And for a city that started as a small Phoenician colony, it grew into something titanic. Carthage was founded, according to legend, in 814 BCE by Queen Dido, a noblewoman from Tyre who fled political turmoil and sailed west. The story goes that she bought as much land as she could cover with an ox hide, then cleverly cut the hide into thin strips to encircle a large hill, which would become the heart of Carthage. Smart, shrewd, and just a little dramatic. Very Phoenician. But myth aside, Carthage was strategically brilliant. Positioned on the coast of what is now Tunisia, it became the Mediterranean's nerve center for trade. It had two harbors, one for merchants and one for warships. Both were feats of engineering, including a circular military dock that could house over 200 ships, each ready for deployment. In fact, historian Appian described it as a naval marvel unmatched in the ancient world. By the 4th century BCE, Carthage wasn't just a city, it was an empire in its own right, spanning the coasts of North Africa, the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and large portions of Spain. It controlled trade routes and built colonies that extended Phoenician influence farther than ever before. Carthage was everything the Phoenicians had dreamed of: rich, resourceful, resilient. And now it had armies to match its ambitions. And that ambition would soon clash with the rising power of the Western world, Rome. The 3 Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage were among the most defining military conflicts of antiquity. They weren't just skirmishes. They were epic, sprawling wars of survival and dominance, and they introduced the world to one of history's most enduring military legends, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal wasn't your average general. He was a strategist, a psychologist, and a master of terrain. At just 9 years old, legend says he swore a blood oath against Rome at the hands of his father, Hamilcar Barca, and he made good on that promise. In 218 BCE, Hannibal set out on one of the most daring military campaigns in history. He marched an army of 50,000 men and 37 war elephants over the Pyrenees, across the Rhone River, and then over the snow-covered Alps to invade Italy from the north. This wasn't just warfare, it was theater. No one had ever attempted anything like it, and for months, Rome was in a state of paralyzed awe. What followed was a string of humiliating Roman defeats. At the Battle of Lake Trasimene, Hannibal orchestrated the largest ambush in military history, trapping and killing thousands of Romans. But his true masterpiece came at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. There, Hannibal executed a perfect double envelopment, luring Roman forces into the center of his formation, then surrounding and annihilating them. At least 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day. It was carnage on a scale Rome had never seen. And yet, Hannibal never took Rome itself. Despite years spent campaigning in Italy, he lacked the siege equipment and reinforcements to breach the capital. Rome, relentless and fueled by near-pathological stubbornness, adapted. They bled Hannibal slowly, cutting off his supply lines and launching counter-campaigns in Spain and North Africa. Eventually, Rome brought the war to Carthage's doorstep. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, Hannibal met his match in a Roman general named Scipio, later dubbed Scipio Africanus. Carthage lost. Hannibal was exiled. The Carthaginian Empire began to crumble. But Rome wasn't done. Nearly 50 years later, during the Third Punic War, the Roman Senate, spurred by the infamous cry of Cato the Elder, Carthago delenda est, or Carthage must be destroyed, did just that. In 146 BCE, Roman legions besieged Carthage, burned it to the ground, and sold its surviving citizens into slavery. There's a popular story that the Romans sowed salt into the fields so nothing would grow again. It's likely apocryphal, but the symbolism remains. Rome didn't just want to defeat Carthage, it wanted to erase it. And yet, it failed. Because even in ruins, Carthage's legacy was too big to bury. Roman traders rebuilt over it. Its harbors were used again. Carthaginian culture and commerce seeped into the Roman world. And Hannibal? He became a military legend. His tactics are still taught in West Point and Sandhurst today. Even the Roman military borrowed from Carthaginian naval innovations, and the economic practices, colonial structures, and maritime policies first developed by Carthage influenced Roman imperial administration for centuries. So Carthage, the greatest of Phoenician daughters, didn't vanish. Like her ancestors, she adapted. She endured, not as a city of stone, but as an idea. An idea that you can challenge an empire, that trade and strategy can stand against brute force, that memory survives fire. In the end, Carthage almost devoured Rome, and even in defeat, she taught Rome how to rule. The vanishing. How a civilization disappears without dying. The great irony? We know so little about the Phoenicians because they wrote about things other than their history. Unlike the Egyptians with their endless hieroglyphics, or the Greeks with their obsessive chronicling, the Phoenicians wrote very little outside of trade records and religious texts. They didn't leave epic poems, no Herodotus of Tyre, no clay tablets listing their kings and battles. And so, their story was largely written by others, often their enemies. The Greeks and Romans described them as clever, sneaky, wealthy, and sometimes sinister. The biblical text, too, painted a complex picture, with cities like Tyre and Sidon caught between praise and prophecy. However, archaeological work has gradually resurrected their story. Inscriptions in Lebanon, Tunisia, and Spain reveal more of their language. Sunken ships and trade goods trace their routes. Temple ruins whisper their once vibrant religious life, dedicated to gods like Baal and Astarte. Their influence lives on in strange places. The English word Bible comes from Byblos, the Phoenician city that traded papyrus. The color purple became synonymous with royalty because of them. In our alphabet, yes, this very script is descended from theirs. Even after their cities were conquered, their knowledge was co-opted, their gods were renamed, their alphabets adopted, and their innovations were absorbed. The Phoenicians integrated into Roman culture, Mediterranean commerce, and the foundations of Western civilization. Which raises the question, what's more powerful, to rule with iron and fall, or to whisper through history and live forever? Conclusion. The Phoenicians didn't leave behind pyramids, empires, or legends carved in stone. They left something more enduring, a world connected by trade, a script that would evolve into nearly every Western alphabet, and a blueprint for prosperity built not on war but on exchange. They were the middlemen of history, quiet, efficient, essential. They bridged continents, inspired innovation, and founded one of history's most feared cities. And yet, most people today wouldn't recognize the name. But now you do. Now you know the story of the empire that built the world, not with armies, but with ideas. Not with force, but with sails. So next time you write a letter, admire a coastline, or even just say the alphabet, remember the people who set those ideas in motion. Remember the Phoenicians. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Phoenicians, check out our book, The Phoenicians, a captivating guide to the history of Phoenicia and the impact made by one of the greatest trading civilizations of the ancient world. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.